in listen-only mode.
Good morning, my name is Marie Jones and welcome to the Significant Changes to the New South Wales Service and Installation Rules webinar. I will be your facilitator for today's presentation. Throughout the course of the webinar you may wish to ask a question. Please, this can be done by typing a question in the space provided in the Questions tab. Upon receiving your question, we will respond at the conclusion of the webinar if time permits. This webinar will be recorded and made available on the NECA YouTube webpage for later use and reference. Finally, I would like to thank you for taking part in today's webinar, and on that note, hand you over to today's presenter, Terry Miller, Senior Technical Advisor Electrical from the New South Wales Department of Industry.
Morning everyone, welcome to the seminar. It's quite a chilly morning here in Sydney. I hope the weather is treating you more kindly in the rest of the state. Let's get straight into the seminar and we'll start with the first slide. This seminar is about the significant changes to the service installation rules just published in August, and these changes have been managed by the Service and Installation Rules for New South Wales Working Group, which has representatives from all segments of the industry on it, and the working group is chaired and owned by the New South Wales Government via the Department of Industry, which today is me. It's taken us about 12 months to get this review going, and it's largely been set up to facilitate the new rollout of smart meters in New South Wales, and particularly reflects the new role of meter providers, which we'll explain shortly. It also addresses some of the technical and safety issues which will arise with smart meters. And we've also taken the opportunity to review some other parts of the rules which we'll explain as we go through. However, most of the emphasis on Chapter 1, which is the general requirements, and Chapter 4, service and metering equipment. Just a bit of background, all this started because of the Australian Energy Market Commission's document Power of Choice in 2012, which was designed to facilitate and expedite the rollout of smart or advanced meters in the national electricity market. You see on the map there that covers all of the eastern states, South Australia and Tasmania. Basically, the national electricity rules have been amended to provide for the phase out of basic metering after 1st of December next year. Basic metering is your current type 5 and 6 meters. We'll then have smart or advanced meters, almost the same thing. Advanced meters is basically a smart meter. You could probably say an advanced meter is a very smart meter. It has special technology in it. It will allow things like remote meter reading, remote disconnections and reconnections, remote access to appliances so they can be controlled by your retailer, more options for cost-reflective pricing, and also provide a lot of information to consumers on their consumption and state of their bills and so on. Now we only have 1 hour, I should have mentioned we only have 1 hour for the seminar this morning, and I hope to finish this presentation in 40 or 45 minutes, which will allow us to respond to any questions that may arise. And as Marie's already mentioned, if you have any questions, please send them in via the email. And the email is service.rules@industry.newsouthwales.gov.au. that's for any questions we can't answer this morning after the presentation is finished, and we'll try and handle as many as we can online. But if you can't, that's the email address to forward your questions to, and they'll be responded to by the department as soon as we can get to them. One of the other drivers, of course, of this change in New South Wales was the finalisation of the solar bonus scheme in December this year, when we'll have a substantial number of customers wanting to update their metering away from the to net metering rather than gross metering due to the end of that scheme. So that will these changes will help facilitate that. Now, the legislation was brought to New South Wales Parliament as the Advanced Meters Bill, which became the Advanced Meters Act, and amended a whole pile of other legislation. Delineates between the basic meters, which is 5 and 6 meters at the moment, and the advanced meters, class 1 to 4. What will happen between now and 1 December next year is that the basic meters will remain with the New South Wales DNSPs and under the current ASP scheme for metering. And advanced metering comes under the national regime, where metering providers will install and own those meters, and the legislation requires the metering providers to have a safety management scheme and to comply with the requirements of New South Wales fair trading in relation to inspection and auditing and so on. And also there are changes to the New South Wales service and installation rules as a part of all this, which is the main reason we're here this morning. So just for some of the basic things, we've rearranged the rules so all the administrative matters are up the front in the first sections, and definitions are no longer numbered, which is similar to other regulatory formats. Several new definitions have been added and some have been altered, so please go through that as soon as you get a chance. One of the things we've done is clarify and define carefully the connection point, which has been a little bit of a grey area in some cases, and that was necessary because of the connection point is now mentioned and defined in the Electricity Supply Act, and the connection point is defined as the junction between the distribution system and the customer's installation. So the common overhead service to a domestic residence, as you can see there, the point of connection is at that connector at the point of attachment between the service wires and the consumer's mains. That's fairly straightforward. If you move to other examples, where you've got a consumer's private service post, the pole, the connection point is there between the service and the private aerial consumer's mains. And we'll just go through the various options because the underground ones are quite interesting. Let's see. A similar story for an overhead service where you've got underground consumer's mains, that's fairly straightforward. The variety of underground different situations, that's a fairly simple one where the underground consumer's mains are fed from a customer-owned pillar. The connection point is in that pillar. At a transformer on say a rural area where there's a pole transformer on a customer's property, their point of connection is at transformer pole, as you see there. Here we have a case where the distribution pillar is owned by the DNSP in the street, and the service main runs to the customer's meter board usually, or to somewhere in the customer's house. The connection point is at the end of that underground service cable. Here we have a case where the customer has a private pillar fed from the distribution pillar. The connection point is inside that pillar with underground consumers' mains back to the residents. I'm going to go back. That's that one. Just bear with us while we... I think we've seen that one. Oh, that's a similar system with underground service from a DNS pillar or substation. Here's a connection from a substation. The connection point is in the substation. I think we've gone through all the options. One of the interesting ones that's not shown there is there are a few cases where the underground connection was run through a private pillar and just looped through without a break, so that you've got a continuous cable that goes through the customer's private pillar. The connection point is now deemed to be in that pillar, and the cables that run from the pillar to the residents are consumers' mains, and the little bit that goes from the pillar out into the street is the service mains. Okay, one of the important things that's in the scheme is this concept of a pioneer scheme. It's been brought about by the changes to the national electricity rules. There have been schemes like this around in various forms with different authorities for some time. Now there's a national uniform requirement, and that is where a customer pays to extend the network to connect their new residents. As you see, lot 2 there, the customer has come along and connected and paid for that extension. At a later date, a customer comes along to lot 1 and wants to connect their service to the mains that the other customer has paid for. They have the new customer has to pay a contribution that ends up going back to the pioneer customer as a share of that payment that they've made. It's a fairly complicated payment. It's done through the DNSP, and it applies within the first 7 years after the first customer has connected. Now, it's very important that you, before you connect, arrange to connect a customer, you make sure that there is no pioneer scheme applying, because the DNSPs will come and chase payment later if they find out you're connected without being aware of that, and it gets very ugly with who is responsible for that payment. So before you connect a customer, please make sure that you have checked out with the DNSP that there is or is not a pioneer scheme applying. It's very important. Okay, so with the changes to the meter provision, the roles of the various parties need to be clarified. The distributor uses the service and installation rules to have minimum standards in place, as they did before, before allowing connection to their system. The DNSP accepts the ownership of the services and the service equipment once the work is energised, and can defect service work that is non-compliant. The DNSP or distributor remains as a metering provider for basic metering. So what will happen is that between now and December next year, there will still be some basic metering installed, depending on what the retailer decides how their premises will be metered. And then, of course, after December next year, there'll be a legacy of the existing type 5 and 6 metres for some time. We don't know how long. It could be 5 years, 10 years, 20 years, 50 years, where the DNSPs will remain as the metering provider for those meters. So a metering provider is registered by AEMO, the Australian Energy Market Operator, under national rules, and they have the authority to install metering equipment. They own the meters, can determine the location of the meters, because some of these smart meters may end up being installed somewhere other than the switchboard, at the discretion of the meter provider and the retailer. They may want to be, for example, inside the customer's home where they can read them and take advantage of some of the facilities. And they can specify the metering technical criteria. Now, one example that's coming up, I'll explain why later, is that we now may have CT metering at between 80 and 100 amps as well as above 100 amps, and the metering provider will determine whether CT metering should be installed. Now, one of the things to clarify is that the change of a meter, changeover a meter from a type 5 or 6 to a type 4 or a smart meter does not constitute an alteration under these rules. So you haven't got to pull out the switchboard or relocate it to comply with the rules just because the metering is being changed. But this exception does not include things like, which we'll come to, the installation of meter protection devices and fire-rated mounting, for example. Okay, the other change which people will welcome is the rules relating to the fixing of service and metering equipment. You must use all the available thickness points, fixing points, sorry, and for panels that are less than 20 millimetres thick, you still must use bolts and nuts to secure the equipment. The bolts must not protrude more than 5 millimetres past the fixing nut, so if they're sticking out at the back, you've got to cut them off and smooth them off to make sure they don't damage insulation and so on. You can use screws on panels 20 millimetres thick or more. They must not protrude past the back of the panel, and they must use at least 75% of the panel thickness. So for a 25 millimetre panel, you've got to use screws that penetrate, say, 19 or 20 millimetres, for example. The rules used to specify steel bolts. You can now use nylon nuts and bolts, for example, and that will help you because on the front of the panel, the heads of the screws or bolts have to be suitably insulated. Okay, so let's get to the main part of these changes. The majority of the changes revolve around the new provision for the new metering arrangements, and they are designed to stop that from happening. Not saying that's going to happen, but we have had cases, this is an overseas example, where a smart meter, electronic meter has overheated and failed explosively. The new rules are designed to avoid that sort of failure, and the main impact of the changes is this concept of service protection and metering protection devices. There are substantial changes to the rules covering these provisions. We're going away from the concept of the term service fuse, and that will now be called a service protection device or service protection fuse. We now will need a MPD or meter protection device, usually a fuse, for each metered installation. The reason for this is that the smart meters are only rated at 80 amps. They have a contactor in them that's rated at 80 amps, so a 100 amp fuse will not protect those meters. So we have to have now, the requirement is for a meter protection device, usually a fuse, 80 amps on each metered customer. Where you've got a typical domestic installation with only one metered customer, the service protection device and meter protection device can be combined in one. So basically the old service fuse can now become a combined SPD and MPD, but it must be an 80 amp rated fuse in there. Still requiring a 100 amp fuse base, just to make sure we don't get any heating problems, and because they're readily available anyway. But the cartridge in those devices must now be an 80 amp fuse, and this is clarified. So that's the rule in there. For a single premises, you can have one fuse or a circuit breaker if the DNSP allows it, doing both functions. So that becomes fairly simple. All you do is replace the what would have been a 100 amp fuse cartridge with an 80 amp cartridge. And if you go to the next diagram for multiple installations, the main service protection device will be a 100 amp or 200 amp fuse, whatever. But each, say this is a typical situation of, say, a block of units. Each individual metered premises must have a meter protection device or 80 amp fuse in there as shown. And you'll see down the bottom there that covers off. You don't need a separate MPD for an off-peak meter that can be run off the one device. It's not shown on the first diagram because we assume there's not many off-peak meters being installed in new premises today. But if they are, you can do that. This diagram covers off where an advanced meter is put into a existing block of flats where there are legacy meters which will remain there as shown. So from now on, every metered installation has to have that 80 amp MPD in place. There has been a question raised that we're looking at. It arises from the case with the granny flat, for example, in a domestic premises where you might run a 63 amp metered supply off to the granny flat, and that at the moment is protected by a separate 63 amp circuit breaker. Can that be used as the MPD, or do you have to install a separate MPD in series with the circuit breaker? We believe the answer is yes. We'll have to check that. We didn't contemplate circumstances where the metered premises may have less than an 80 amp rating. So we believe we'll be able to modify the rules to say the MPD must be 80 amps or less, and we do believe that the circuit breaker will be able to fulfill that function, but just let us clarify that. We'll get that response out to you as soon as we can. So as you see, that's the situation with a multiple occupancy with a single SPD and the 80 amp MPD fuse on each separately metered installation. So as I said, the MPD fuse base must be rated at 100 amp with an 80 amp cartridge. You must label them on the board clearly as either an SPD or an MPD or combined SPD stroke MPD in that instance, and you must put the fuse element rating on the board next to the device. So please remember clause 4.7 has got extensive changes information. A lot more. I've gone through the major ones here, but there'll be extensive other ones that you'll need to read very carefully. The other thing we want to bring to your attention is that we have discovered that there are some service fuse cartridges coming into the country that have got asbestos, asbestos inside them. They shouldn't have, but they are sneaking through, and WorkSafe New South Wales is working very closely with the Border Protection people to stop that happening. However, there are still some that are around, and you need to be aware of that. The asbestos is actually inside the cartridge, so it doesn't become a problem unless the cartridge case ruptures. And WorkSafe have been quite pragmatic about this situation and decided that where the fuse links are not ruptured, they still must be treated as asbestos waste and disposed of as that, but they're not going to stop people working on switchboards because of things like that, because of the possibility that one of these may rupture. But if you are disposing of fuse links, you must treat them as asbestos waste, so it's putting it in an asbestos bag and so on, and disposing of them appropriately. If you want more information on that particular issue, you can find on the Safe Work New South Wales website. In terms of implementing these rules, the revised rules should be implemented as soon as practicable. Certainly after the end of this month, which is next week, all the metering work must comply with the new rules, particularly the requirements for the ATT MPDs and SPDs. And all work is to comply with all the new rules after the 30th of November. Now, we're aware there'll be jobs that you've started this week or some time ago that hasn't been energised yet. That's going to be a grey area. There'll be some discretion in that for what is fair and reasonable, but please keep in mind that it's expected that these new rules will be implemented as soon as possible. Thank you, and we finished that quite reasonably in half an hour, so we have plenty of time for online questions, and we've got a few of these coming through, so I'll just try and answer those. That's the first one there, Marie. Does the
7-year rule apply? The first question is, does the 7-year rule apply?
I presume we're talking about the Pioneer scheme there, yeah, and the 7-year rule applies. So once 7 years has passed since the initial installation was put in and paid for by the first customer, subsequent customers connect without having to pay. But as I say, you need to make sure of that before you go ahead.
The next question, if DNSP metering is installed, will it be eventually removed and replaced with the smart metering?
That's correct. The retailer will decide from now on what the metering is going to be, and so they're starting to roll out smart meters in theory now, or they're able to anyway. So what will happen is when you have a new connection, the customer will have to choose a retailer. The retailer will then engage a metering provider to install the metering that they have decided they will install in consultation with the customer. And that may well be in the next 12 months still basic metering, which the DNSP will own and will be installed by an ASP. Or they may decide to install the new smart metering. So there'll be basic meters type 5 and 6 owned by the DNSP as a meter provider certainly next year and on into the future, until they are replaced, which may be by a customer changing retailer and electing to have smart metering within the next 12 months. After December next year, there'll be no choice. Any new meter or meter change will be smart meters. If a meter fails or in service, or the DNSP discovers there's for example, as they do from time to time, a batch of faulty meters that need to be changed over, they will notify the retailer, who will then in turn negotiate with the customer to install a smart meter. No new basic meters will be installed after December next year, but as you can see, there'll be a long tail-off period, we don't know how long that'll be, where there'll still be a lot of the old type 5 and 6 meters, basic meters in service.
The next question, does an MP have to retrofit a ATT MPD when replacing a basic meter with a smart meter on behalf of the retailer?
The answer is yes. So when a customer, in the next 12 months, optionally the customer and retailer may decide to install a smart meter, and then after next year, as I said, any new meter will be a smart meter. There will of course be the vast majority of premises will not be non-compliant with the new requirements, so the meter provider will have to install the 80 amp MPDs when they install that meter.
Does one 80 amp fuse per unit in multiple units suffice? Essential energy in our area have this system in operation for years.
So I think you're talking about there that these 80 amp fuses already exist. If they exist and they comply with what the service rules now say, and it seems like they may, that's fine. You've then got to think about what the main service protection device does. That should be okay too, as long as it complies with the new rules. That's fine.
Can a consumer refuse a smart meter?
That's a good one. For the next year they can. Up until December next year they can say, no, I don't want it, I want a basic meter. The installation, if it's a new one, still has to comply with the new rules to allow for a future changeover to a smart meter. In other words, have the MPD in place. And it's up to a negotiation between the retailer and the customer as to whether they will or not have a smart meter. It may get down to the customer changing retailers, but that is optional for the next 12 months. After December next year, there's no choice. Every new meter will be a smart meter.
How is the use of a 100A SPD and a downstream HEA MPD being dealt with in relation to compliance with AS 3000 clause 2.5.7.2.3 in relation to circuit discrimination?
If that is an issue, you still have to comply with the AS 3000 requirements. So if you can get a situation that does both, that's great. If it doesn't, you're going to have to still put circuit breakers in for discrimination. As I said, one thing we're looking at is to whether the and of course for the SPD, some authorities allow you to use a circuit breaker. That's provided for in the rules for the SPD. We think you'll be able to use a circuit breaker in place of the MPD and use ones of lesser rating, as I've already mentioned. We're going to clarify that, but yes, you've still got to comply with AS 3000 as well as these rules. So in some cases it may mean using circuit breakers instead of or as well as the fuse.
How can energy providers canvass change of gross meters at no charge to the customer if they do? Is ownership of the meter is with the retailer, and what happens if the customer wishes to change provider?
Part of the legislation, national legislation, was to free up choice for the customers. So the idea is that a retailer goes to a customer with a deal, and which may involve installing a new meter at no cost. It may involve a charge. It may be recovered through the tariff. All that is up to negotiation between the customer and the retailer. So I'll just read the question again. the ownership of the new meters will reside with the meter provider through the retailer, through to the retailer, and the idea will hopefully be that if you change retailer, there'll be some arrangement with keeping the meter and sorting that out with the new retailer. So you won't have to change meters, smart meters later on if you change retailers. Just make sure I've answered all that question. So with the ending of the solar bonus scheme and the change of all the gross meters to net meters, that can be something that retailers are free to negotiate with their customers and charge for however that negotiation ends up happening on a commercial basis. I hope that answers that question. Please send another one if I haven't answered that the way I should have.
With a two-phase supply for 2 units or a three-phase supply with 3 units, i.e. 1 unit per phase, is a service protection device and a meter protection required?
As far as I can say, yes, I'll clarify that, but it seems to me that if you've got 1 meter protected by 1 fuse, which you would have in this case, 1 on each phase, that can be, as long as that's an 80 amp fuse, that's okay.
I'm not sure this is more of a comment. Most retailers are offering free of charge meters on changeover.
I think you'll find that'll end up being the case, yes, because they're anxious to get customers. The cost of meters is a barrier to some customers, so they're bundling this up in their offer and saying that they'll give you a free meter. But that's up to them, as I say. It's up to customers to negotiate that with the retailer. Thank you. Look, we've got no more questions on board. We've got a little bit more time if someone has anything they want for us to talk about here this morning. Don't forget, as I said, if you think of questions after today, to send them into the special email address we've set up, which is service.rules@industry.newsouthwales.gov.au. We'll take all those questions on board and promulgate the responses widely so that everyone is aware of the questions that are being asked and how they're being responded to.
We've just got another. Sorry, they have been proactive in changing gross meters with little consultation to customers. As an ASP, we have been basically cut from this service.
Yes, I am aware of a couple of instances where a customer has had a smart meter installed without their knowledge or without their approval, and that cannot be done. That is wrong, and those situations are being addressed. If you know of any, you should report that to. I was going to say the appropriate authority, which I think is us. Could be the Department of Fair Trading, but please let that be known, because that shouldn't be happening.
You mentioned fire-rated mounting. Can you please explain?
There is a clause in the rules. I can't put the hand on it just sitting here, but there's a requirement for fire-rated mounting of the equipment, and that hasn't changed. You've just got to make sure you still comply with that with the new arrangements. You know, there's a change in fixing requirements with screws and nylon bolts and so on does not change the fire rating provisions that are still in there.
In a typical strata block of units, can an 80 amp fuse be a combined SPD and MDF comply if it is 80 amps?
I'm not sure I quite understand that, because I imagine a strata block of units will have a requirement for a much larger service protection device, say at least 100 amps or higher, 200 amps, and then each unit in that block, separately metered, must have an 80 amp fuse on the excuse me, on the metering to each unit. So if I haven't explained that, can you just type something in again and I'll clarify. But basically, I can't contemplate a situation where you'd have a main service protection device of only 80 amps and then subunits below that.
I had a meter installer turn up at my own home to change a meter, even though I had indicated to Origin that I was not willing for them to proceed. This was reported, but nothing happened.
Okay, if you could send that through to the that email address I gave you, we'll certainly pursue that, because that should not be happening. It's just wrong. Any change of meter must be done in consultation with the customer.
We're just being requested to give the email address again. It is service.rules@industry.nsw.gov.au. I will be sending out a copy of this webinar to all attendees, as well as details of the email and a copy of the presentation after the webinar has finalised. I'll just give a few more minutes to see if there's any more questions.
Okay, thank you everyone. We'll finish the seminar there. I hope you found that informative. Please, as I say, if you have any queries, get them to that email address, and we'll get a response out to everyone as soon as we can. Thanks very much. Enjoy your long weekend. See you later.